All right, we're going to go ahead and start the webinar. This will last about 45 minutes with some time at the end for questions and answers so that you can ask questions anytime during the presentation. And please submit your questions in the Q&A feature, which is at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We do have the chat on. It's going to be used for us to provide links for you to click into. So please watch out for those. And with that, I will go ahead and turn over to Christine.
Thanks, Kim, and welcome everyone to this webinar. My name is Christine Locascio. I'm the Chief of Policy, Strategy, and Membership with the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, and I'm here to welcome you to today's webinar, From Port to Shelf, How Tariffs Are Impacting Wine and Spirits Wholesalers and Retailers in the United States. And we have a really great panel of experts here today to help us understand this issue of tariffs and its ramifications kind of beyond the spirits producer side. And before we get into that, of course, we all support the goals of creating jobs and manufacturing in the United States, and of course, in securing fair and reciprocal trade for U.S. companies. And the U.S. spirits sector is really the model for fair and reciprocal trade. We've had a level playing field with 51 countries, including some of our major trading partners, the EU, UK, et cetera. And in fact, 86% of U.S. spirits exports go to countries that apply zero tariffs, and 98% of spirits imports come from countries that also apply zero tariffs on spirits coming into their countries from the United States. Currently, the United States is imposing a 15% tariff on spirits and wines from the EU and a 10% tariff on spirits and wines from the UK. And spirits are unique for a variety of reasons because, of course, our companies make wonderful products that we sell here and around the world and import from around the world, so including American whiskeys, which we export globally, and, of course, importing products like cognac and Scotch whiskey, tequila, Irish whiskeys, rum, gins, vodkas, and more. But how do these products get to consumers? And today we want to examine two essential components of the great U.S. hospitality industry, our wholesaler and retail partners, and how they're impacted by tariffs. So our panel is here today to help us understand this and more, and to get into some details of the practical implications of tariffs. And I'm very pleased to be joined by two fellow members of our ToastNet Tariffs Coalition, the Wines and Spirits Wholesalers of America and American Beverage Licensees, and two of their fantastic members to help us put this all into context. So let's jump right in. So we're going to start off with our first speaker, Dawson Hobbs, who is the Executive Vice President, Government Affairs with the Wines and Spirits Wholesalers of America, where he oversees the association's state, federal, and regulatory government affairs team. He joined the association back in 2006, I think, and certainly is an expert on the industry. And of course, we work collaboratively on many issues. So Dawson, welcome.
Thanks, Christine.
Glad to have you here. So let's start off. First of all, let's explain to our audience, who is WSWA, and what are the top things you want our audience to know about your association and your members?
So we represent America's wine and spirits wholesalers. So we're the ones that we buy the product from the manufacturers, like your members, as well as importers that bring it into the country, and we sell it to the bars, restaurants, on and off premise retailers around the country. We do this operating in all 50 states in some way, and we provide those products both from a logistics standpoint, but we also provide a sales force that represents the brands to the various retailers and helps build brands in both the on and off premise accounts. Our members are entirely family-owned American businesses, and unfortunately, with this tariff situation, much of the burden is falling on them as the tariff prices are built in as they purchase products before they sell them to the retailers.
Thank you. And as we know, imported spirits have been subjected to retaliatory tariffs in previous years, and then those were paused for some time. Can you talk to me about, you've been there since 2006. We've been through some of these issues before in the past. What do you say that wholesalers have learned from that previous experience, and how have tariffs imposed on imports of spirits and wine, particularly from the EU and UK? How is that currently impacting your members this time around?
Yeah, this time is a little bit different. I'd say because it's so widespread. In the past, when there have been tariffs, they've been maybe targeted on a smaller group of countries or a single country. The fact that it's really impacting all of our significant trading partners has presented a real challenge. As you know, wine and spirits are unique in that if you want a product, say a Scotch whiskey, it's got to come from Scotland. There are wonderful American whiskeys, but they're a different style, a different product. Same thing with wines. California makes wonderful wine, but a Bordeaux or a Burgundy is just a little bit different. The other thing that's been different this time was at the beginning of the year, the on again, off again announcements of these tariffs really created a problem for our members. The lead time in ordering product from Europe can be, well over a month or two. And they were trying to plan their purchases, and tariffs would be announced, and then they would be delayed, and then they would be announced. And it caused a significant hardship as they tried to plan their inventory for the year.
Yeah, that is very interesting. And of course, consumers are looking for different types of products, right? As you say, Scotch whiskey has to come from Scotland, cognac has to come from France. And there are things that through various trade agreements and other agreements, government to government, that has afforded that protection, right? And in exchange, those countries have agreed to protect, certain categories of American whiskey in exchange for that protection here. So I'm glad you really raised it, because that's a really essential point to note. These are products that are, we are unique in that regard with respect to looking at it through a spirits lens, of course, too. So thank you. And then what about, is there anything you can speak to in terms of, specific sourcing challenges or particular disruptions, in addition to anything that you mentioned before that your members are facing?
Yeah, I think, in particular is one of the fastest growing categories right now is tequila. And it's created a real problem as people have tried to, source tequila at the right place, and then tariffs would be announced and then delayed and then announced, and it's been a significant issue. The other thing is to really thinking about the European and UK products is it's not just these products themselves coming in, but the tariffs being applied to materials that impact domestic producers as well. Things like cork, in some cases packaging materials. It's created a real disruption within the supply chain that's caused our members to really have a lot of uncertainty, which is very difficult, especially right now as we're heading into the peak of the holiday season. We all know how important this last part of the year is to our industry. And facing the continuation of tariffs puts us in a really difficult situation.
Great, thank you, Dawson. So speaking of your members, at this point, I would like to invite one of your members, Dina Opeachy, who is the president of Opeachy Family Distributing and also happens to be, I believe, the current chairwoman of WSWA, correct? To join this conversation and to talk to us more specifically from, person who's running a company, running a wholesaler or distributing company, to talk to us a little bit more about some of the specifics. I appreciate Dawson kind of giving the broad impact across the industry. And now we'll turn to Dina. Thank you, Dina, for joining us.
No problem. So I am actually the retired chair
Okay.
of the WSWA. I'm the recently past chair, but I have the pleasure of being past chair on the executive committee for another year. So, but I truly enjoyed my time and wish it had been a less eventful year, but that's the way it goes.
Excellent. Apologies for that. So can you tell us a little bit about your company? I know it has a long history, so please educate us on some of that and tell us about what you do.
Sure. So hi, I'm Dina Opeachy. I'm president of Opeachy Family Distributing. We are in the wholesale distribution business. We sell wine, spirits, and non-alc products in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Maryland, Delaware, and DC. Our portfolio is pretty diverse, but about 30% of our business does come from imported products. And not only do we buy those products locally, but we also import many of those products directly.
Oh, great. So would you say 30% is that amongst some of your peers, is that sort of roughly what it is, or does it really differ widely amongst wholesalers and importers?
Yeah, I think that the Northeast skews more towards imported brands than you find as you move west across the country. So it's probably on the higher side with regards to general wholesale distribution, but I think pretty consistent in the Northeast. And I would say that, there's wholesalers where 50 to 100% of their volume is imported, especially when you look at the New York market and the diversity of portfolio available across the distribution tier.
Absolutely. So turning back to tariffs, how have these tariffs on imported spirits and wines from the EU and UK affected your business? And in particular, I'd love to hear, some of the concrete examples of how it's impacting the day-to-day work. Is it, sourcing disruptions? Is it pricing or sales, administration of the changing tariffs? Any of those details, how is it impacting the day-to-day operations?
So we have not seen any disruptions in source. Product availability has been good. I know as we came into the new year, we did see some of our supplier partners building up their inventory in local warehouse with the anticipation of the tariffs, looking to make sure that they could support the market and also have continuity of pricing. When the tariffs were announced, I think that 90-day period, for the most part, people held steady. They want to make sure that, reacting in our business is not overnight because of the fact that we are price filing in various markets, registering products. So if something happens tomorrow, it doesn't necessarily impact our customers, the retailers and restaurateurs, for 45 to 60 days from now. And then obviously the consumer accordingly. But I'd say for that first 90-day period, we really held steady. Our importers, looked to support the tariff for the most part. They were concerned with their continuing business and also knowing the disruption that pricing can have in the marketplace, where, again, there was so much uncertainty. Once the tariffs were confirmed, at that point, it was clear that we would have to have a change in approach. Our importers couldn't absorb the tariff forever. Obviously, to the extent that we were absorbing it too, everybody's in a position also just with regards to current market conditions, where, pricing needed to be adjusted. And now we could adjust it for what we know. I think the biggest challenge has actually been behind the scenes. When we had tariffs in 2018, they were very one size fits all. The tariff, was a flat rate across all countries or the countries where it applied, and it was pretty consistent. The tariffs we're managing now are far from one size fits all. You have a different amount, right, across the various countries. And when you look at Europe, where the majority of our business is done, the tariffs are inclusive of duty and IR. And so it brings a different component into the analysis of the tariff because, again, every product has a different price. So you can't just say it's a flat 10%. You have to take into consideration how the duty and IR impact the particular cost of that product. And then when you layer over that, the foreign exchange volatility that we've seen since the beginning of this year, where the euro was at 102 and now it's at 117, that just further exacerbates, I would say, the burden that we're currently managing from an administrative and financial standpoint, because we really can't rely on necessarily what we think the tariff is going to be. We really have to analyze our customs entries with each purchase that we make to ensure that whether it's due to foreign exchange, change in cost, calculation of the tariff, that it's consistent with what we have in our system and that we based our pricing models off of. So, there's a lot more complexity to this tariff structure than what we saw back in 2018.
Yeah, I'm glad that you introduced us to some of those complexities, things that I hadn't even considered as well. Do you have an estimate, from a personnel standpoint, how much more time is your team spending on this than before? I mean, have you had to have a lot more man hours devoted to this to address this complexity?
It certainly doesn't help morale, because again, it's kind of felt like the focus on this is not necessarily productive as a business, right? So, again, I think, from a timing standpoint, obviously things flowed pretty seamlessly before. There was consistency in our taxing. And now, literally we're reviewing every customs entry that we receive from those countries or those vendors where we know that this impacts their pricing. So I don't, Christine, have an amount in hours, but what I can tell you is that it's significant enough that, that we're seeing concern raised across, those in our company who manage this discipline, that, they're hoping that there may be some light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, let's hope so. And that's, of course, why we have been, working as part of our broad coalition to urge a return to zero for zero as part of the Toast-Not Tariffs Coalition. But before we go, I want to ask you one last question before we go to our next speaker. But I know we keep hearing about the importance of certainty to businesses, and you talked a lot about that right now. But can you delve a little bit more? So from your perspective and how tariffs contribute to the uncertainty to businesses and wholesalers like yours. So in other words, when we talk about business uncertainty, what does that mean to you in operating your business?
So, I mean, I think that, I think we're all operating under a lot of uncertainty at the moment. And this is just an added component of that. You're seeing the alcohol business evolve. Whether it's, consumer engagement, whether it's, the influence of other intoxicants, whether it's, focus on health and wellness. I mean, you're seeing a lot of things impacting the industry. I think that, from the tariff standpoint, while not ideal, at least we know now what the rules are, and we can manage to them. I think the conversations taking place now, obviously at the Supreme Court. Again, we would love to know where we're going and how we're going to manage that. But I think at this time, and I don't think it's just our business. I think it's any business. Uncertainty is part of the game, and it's about how you can pivot when you do have that direction. So we're trying to be very thoughtful in how we've approached the tariffs and our pricing. Looking to not negatively impact business through the holidays, looking ahead from a consumer standpoint and, and what we're seeing in other product segments. So, I mean, I think at this point in time, my crystal ball is a little bit fuzzy, but I do think, the uncertainty continues at least until we have resolution with regards to the direction of tariffs. Until then, we know what the rules are.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. So with that, we're going to shift over to hear from the retail tier. Thank you so much, Dina. We're going to come back to everybody at the end. I'd like to welcome John Bodnovich, who is the Executive Director at American Beverage Licensees, to join our discussion now. He manages ABL's Federal Government Affairs portfolio, grassroots advocacy, strategic communications, industry trade associations, suppliers, wholesalers, and importers. Basically, he does everything, John, as well as their social responsibility organizations and other stakeholders. So welcome, John, to this discussion.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks for having me.
So somebody told me that it's Packaged Liquor Store Month.
Correct. Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So quick backstory. For many years, so we represent on and off premise licensees, bars and taverns, as well as package stores throughout the country. Local businesses, Main Street businesses, selling beer, wine, and spirits, kind of the final link of the famed three-tier system we all operate in. And for many, many years, we had Tavern Month every May. And one of our past presidents, Warren Scheidt, who's a retailer from Indiana, said, well, why don't we have a liquor store month? And I said, I don't know, we probably should have one. So each November, we try to highlight the importance of packaged liquor stores, just behind every bottle on the shelf, there's a local business owner, there's a team of people who know their customers, who follow the rules, who contribute directly to their communities. You know, a shameless plug. I'd urge everyone to consider popping in their local bottle shop this month, perhaps on Small Business Saturday. Grab a bottle for a friend or family or for yourself, and support some local small business.
Absolutely. We should all support our local package stores. Um, so what are the top things that you want us to know about retailers and your members?
Yeah. Well, just writ large, I think sometimes it's easy to look past your local small business as part of a larger, you know, economic driver and engine. So just, you know, since we're talking about kind of the impact in the industry overall, I thought I'd just share a couple numbers based on our recently updated economic impact study, just to demonstrate kind of the breadth of the retail tier of the industry. So in the U.S., direct retail alcohol sales contribute to the creation of 3.6 million jobs, $184 billion in wages. That's through over 600,000 licensed establishments across the country. It's on and off premise. Over $540 billion annually in economic activity. And then on top of that, collecting and remitting over $100 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. So that's helping fund schools, infrastructure, public safety, and so many other things. Obviously, in Washington, D.C. right now, funding is a major topic of conversation as we've just come out of the government shutdown. But when you look to, again, the small business, you may not think about the impact it can have. But when you have a lot of them, as we do with our really diverse ecosystem of alcohol retailers throughout the country, it does make a big difference. They're also the face of the alcohol industry in many ways. So, you know, as much as we all may recognize the label on our favorite bottle of beer or bottle of spirits or bottle of wine, you know, we also know the place where we can go find that in our city, our town, our state. And there's, you know, the kind of social compact of alcohol retail in terms of agreeing and understanding that we need to operate in a highly regulated marketplace. We're serving adult products to adult consumers in a responsible manner, and then again, kind of being part of local communities. So, you know, I think it's that context in which we come at this conversation. I also would just kind of put a point on it. I think we can also look at beverage alcohol retail in terms of indications of consumer trends and attitudes, which is so important. I know you guys do that at Discus. I know WSWA through their Sip Source and other things does that as well. You know, beverage alcohol shoppers can be quite price conscious, and you know, they may, depending on that, may be inclined to trade up or trade down, to use a little industry lingo, when it comes to, you know, what they're willing to spend. And we should never forget that for many people, the products that my members are selling and your members are making and Dawson's members are distributing are affordable luxuries, right? That brighten their day, that are part of their lifestyle, and you know, are really important. So that's kind of the big picture on who we are, where we're coming from.
Absolutely. And your point about, you know, at times being the face of the industry, I know, you know, many retailers are so knowledgeable about the products. And so even when I go to my local one, and even though I work for the spirits industry, I can go and ask a question about, you know, this, that, or the other brand. And, you know, they're very knowledgeable. And, you know, in those states where they allow tastings, like that's a great opportunity for consumers to sample things that maybe they've heard about and, you know, aren't ready to, you know, spend $50 on the bottle, but want to sample it. So like retailers play a really important role.
I appreciate you getting in the sampling conversation point. That's great. But yeah, it's really true. As we like to say, you know, it's not like you're having to go to the dry cleaners or the bank or the post office. People look forward to going to their local package store to find and explore new products. So absolutely.
All right, so let's come back to the topic at hand, which is tariffs. So looking at it through your lens of the retailer, you know, how are the tariffs on imported spirits and wines affecting your members across the U.S., just sort of generally?
Yeah, and it's why I'm so glad that we're having this conversation today and including all three tiers of the industry. You know, a tariff may sound like a distant policy issue, to people when you're talking about things that are coming from different places around the world, but it has they can have very real local impacts on American businesses. When the U.S. when tariffs are imposed on imported spirits or wine, those costs will flow through the supply chain. Importers, distributors. Dina made some great points earlier about that, and ultimately on to retailers and customers. I think the first and foremost challenge that my members have is what was touched on earlier, and that is lack of predictability, right? How can you plan when there is lingering uncertainty around tariffs? It creates a number of challenges, including potentially higher wholesale prices on imported products, which can mean either thinner margins or higher prices for consumers. You have potentially reduced product availability when importers cut back on shipments, their portfolio variety. That can affect what a retailer is going to carry when it comes to those products. Our members are small businesses, so they don't have the scale to absorb costs easily. So this really it really affects them directly. And then I think just higher costs in general, and I think Dawson touched on it, components of products, whether that's packaging or other materials. We think about the bottle and we think about the juice in the bottle, but we don't necessarily think about the package it comes in, and that can that can be affected by tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
I think to echo my counterparts and colleagues here, our industry benefits from stable, open trade relationships that keep our supply chain predictable, and consumer choice is broad. It's, again, you go to your package store, you're generally going to see lots and lots of choices, which is great for consumers, and it's great for the story that we talk about when we talk about the role of beverage alcohol in our culture and society. But I have to tell you, preparing for this webinar and just really conversationally over the past 6 months or so, there's a lot of concern in the retail community, with the pass-through risk with cost in terms of, importers that have to charge more for products or are willing to absorb some, but not all of an additional cost, which we certainly understand. The assortment risk problem when it comes to imported SKUs that may become unavailable or potentially less profitable. There's competitive pressures. I think, in some instances, domestic producers can fill a gap, and that's great. But that means adjusting sourcing, marketing, inventory. These aren't changes you can just make in your business at the drop of a hat. And then finally, just there's larger downstream risk, I think, and that gets to what we're potentially looking toward, depending on how long this all continues, which is potentially reduced sales volume, reduced variety. That can affect your overall store health, especially during this important holiday season when we are looking to consumers to spend on a gift or a special bottle or something that's going to mean something to whoever they're giving it to. So there's all those issues are kind of colliding at one time, and again, it's maybe not something you think of on a day-to-day, but those are very real things that impact small business.
Absolutely. So other than tariffs, are there other challenges that are currently impacting retailers?
Sure.
Dina talked about some of those.
Yeah, she did. Look, I think it's a challenging market for lots of folks right now. It tends to be market specific, right? But just some kind of, I guess, big top line issues. Inflation and supply chain costs are very real in this environment. Workforce challenges, obviously, and I think that goes for not just the merchant community, but for manufacturers and others as well. Hiring and retention of good staff, employees is a challenge. And then I think the larger conversation about consumer behavior and shifting consumer attitudes and the ability to have to adapt, whether that's looking at no and low alcohol products, whether that's considering other products that enter the marketplace that might not neatly fit in an alcohol category. So, I think, all of that, you open the Wall Street Journal or New York Times and you see the article every now and again where it talks about the different changes that are going on culturally and people's relationships with, again, what they're spending money on and how they're enjoying themselves. But I will say, it's not all doom and gloom. So I don't want to just focus on the negative. I do think there's opportunity here to communicate, and in this instance about tariffs specifically. There is a way for our members to use this moment to underscore the value that they provide. Right, we're keeping this bottle and this brand on the shelf because we know you want it and we know you like it, despite the cost pressures that may be involved. We're here because we want to serve. We're in the customer service business and we're in the hospitality industry, and that means trying to meet people where they are and what they want. So, if we can say, we're absorbing a cost increase because we want to keep you as a customer, I think that resonates. But, the pivot there is also, but by the way, these are really challenging times, and we do want to try and see a resolution and to get closer to that or to that 0 for 0 that you talked about. So, generally just I think retailers are urging folks on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean to try and work through some of these disputes and to remind them that what may be happening around a conference table in Europe or in Washington, D.C. On some of these policies has a real effect on Main Street businesses and all that goes with it.
Absolutely. And that is a great transition, John, to me inviting one of your members, Nicholas Feedy, who is the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Liquor Operators Collaborative, to hone in a little bit more on the direct impact on small business retailers. Welcome, Nick.
Hi, everyone's been doing a great job so far. I'm not only executive director, but I'm also a retailer.
That's right.
So it's interesting being on the proverbial front lines of this tariff discussion, because at the end of the day, suppliers pass down any type of price increase down to wholesalers and wholesalers to retailers, and we are the front-facing businesses that have to show these price increases to the public.
Mhm.
So as these items are going up on the shelf, it is creating a pressure within our stores on the consumer. Uh, and depending on the item, things that tend to be on the lower tier are definitely more price sensitive in the eyes of the consumer. So you're starting to see pressures get created within the retail account of consumers feeling very uneasy about if they're able to come in the store and afford the products they're so used to paying affordable prices for.
Mhm. That's a really important, because again, you're on the front lines, you're a retailer, you're also, the executive director of the collaborative. Can you tell us a little bit about what the collaborative does and who your members are?
Sure. So I represent Rhode Island's independent liquor retailers. There's 237 of us in Rhode Island, which is a very small place. But we are an affiliate of American Beverage Licensees. We are entirely off-premise uh, focused in Rhode Island, and we work really well with our fellow affiliates in the ABL across on-premise and off-premise issues.
Great. Um, So can we talk a little bit more about how these tariffs, from a small company perspective, can you give us a little bit more insights into how smaller companies, smaller retailers are coping with this? What they're hearing from their consumers, what concerns they may have, as we're now, I don't know how many weeks we are away from the holidays, but they're around the corner. This is a really important season for us. So, can you share some of those insights of what you're hearing and what you're seeing in your store?
It's creating spending pressure. And
Mhm.
what I mean by that is it's making retailers make really hard decisions on where to place their dollars when doing their spending in the holidays. So where someone might carry 90 days on hand of a specific item, they may carry half a year on hand. By the way, those invoices are due to be paid a lot sooner than half a year. So
Mhm.
retailers are having to get creative with where they place their dollars, which, to John's point, may see some contraction in stores as far as product selection. Because at the end of the day, you have to be able to pay your invoices. So, but when you're looking at items that are especially price sensitive in the marketplace and they're imported, about to face a tariff, you may buy in extra just to insulate and stay competitive in the marketplace because you don't know how much your competitor is buying of that item. So it's creating a lot of uncertainty, not just in the supplier or wholesale tier, but in the retail tier. It's making us behave differently with our buying habits, and that's pretty concerning.
Yeah, and that was my next question was on the point of uncertainty. And I think you explained that, but is there anything else you would like to note about your concern about tariffs and retailers in Rhode Island that you'd like to share with the audience today?
Well, at the end of the day, people look at tariffs as being this far off thing. It affects our everyday lives. It's not just at the packaged liquor store. It's when you're buying, meat at the grocery store or any type of imported item. Uh, any type of price increase, people have a finite amount of money to spend. So when everyday things are costing more, it's inevitably going to affect your trip to the packaged liquor store, resulting in most likely trade down, unfortunately.
Mhm.
And also when you're looking at importing, people think that it's all these gigantic corporations that are importing. There are quite a few Main Street businesses across this country, boutique importers, where tariffs are a real concern out of the gate. So if you're a small wine importer and you are importing one container at a time, and you have extreme anxiety once your container hits the water, what level tariff you're going to get charged at port, that's going to affect your entire pricing scheme and may ruin your business from a competitive standpoint with your competitors. So it is not just a retail issue. It is an up and down industry issue. And right now, our industry has faced some headwinds. I mean, with the no and low movement, everyone in our industry is looking for different avenues of revenue. And adding tariffs to those headwinds does not help anyone with regards to doing business.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So I know we want to stay on time here. So if we could, I'd like to ask one final question to each panelist. So if we can put everybody's picture on the screen. So if I take out my crystal ball and look 6 months into the future, and tariffs on spirits and wines, particularly from the EU and UK, are still in place, we hope that's not the case. We're working hard to hope that's not the case. But if it is, what do you see for your businesses 6 months down the road?
I'll take this one. It's a balance. It's a balancing act. So everyone, when you're running a business, it's all about the bottom line. So when you are having to get creative to operate differently in your business, you may have to start to cut things like labor and operational costs. It's going to affect how we come to market as a whole.
I'd add, I think, volatility is a big challenge. We've heard the word predictability thrown around here today, and rightfully so. If things were modest and predictable and stable, they still wouldn't necessarily be a good thing, but it would at least be something that you could plan around. So I think, if there was a message that I would be hoping to send to my future self in 6 months would be, things have stabilized to a point where we can at least plan and try to get through. But beyond that, a lot's going to rely on the activities of the Toast Not Tariffs Coalition and how much we can engage, the White House and Congress and the media, and hopefully some of the folks on this call or webinar today are going to be able to be part of that.
I'd add that I think that, to date, there's been a real hope that tariffs would be resolved and that trade deals would be reached. And a lot of people throughout the supply chain, and we've heard it here, have tried to spread or absorb those costs. That's not sustainable in the long run. And in another 6 months, I think the consumer is really going to see the full impact of the tariffs, and not just in our industry, but others as well. And that's when there's going to be a real pressure point.
Well, and I would say, I think the one side of this is, how this impacts our other customers, which are the domestic suppliers that we work with. We've looked how it's impacted our foreign suppliers and their products being brought into the US and ultimately positioned. But, you know, to the extent the tariffs are impacting imports, they're also impacting exports in a really meaningful way. And, you know, I think that's a side of the business that, again, you know, when you say 6 months from now, you know, Canada, for example, represents, you know, a good percentage of our domestic suppliers' business. And that lane has closed essentially. And so, you know, now they have overproduction and need to manage that. And, you know, and I think ultimately that's going to also present challenges in how they're able to invest in their business domestically and things that they maybe, you know, previously used to be able to do from a marketing standpoint, from a price protection standpoint. And so I don't think anyone is immune right now to the impacts of the tariffs.
Yes, and you know, particularly with regard to Canada, you know, we all know our products are not yet on the shelves in many provinces there, and that's something we are working hard to try and resolve so that we can get back on the shelves in the really important market, Canada. So I know some of you are putting some questions in the chat. So while you're all getting some additional questions together for the last couple minutes here, you know, if any of you are concerned, any of you on this call are concerned about this topic, I want to let you know this is where you can make a difference. So what can you do? Well, one thing you can do is join the many, many thousands of people that have already lent their names to a petition that we have pulled together as part of our coalition to highlight the negative impact of the tariffs on EU and UK imports of spirits and wine during this holiday season. So if you can lend your name to this effort, please scan this QR code. There's also the link to where you can sign this petition in the chat. Please join us. Again, we have many, many thousands that have already done so. Please add your name so we can add a couple more thousand. We'd appreciate that. And so, secondly, the other thing that you all can do is to help tell your story. You know, we had 4 great panelists here that were talking about the impact on wholesalers and retailers, absolutely critical components of our hospitality industry here in the United States. So tell us your story. Tell, you know, Nick and Dina told their story about their businesses and the impact. So if you have a story to tell about how these tariffs are impacting you, there'll be a link in the chat, if it's not there already, where you can just fill out a brief form and tell the story of, you know, the specifics of how the tariffs are impacting you. And we will collect those and aggregate those as well. So at this point, let me turn to a couple of questions here. We have one. How far in advance do your members typically make purchasing decisions, and do contracts specify who pays the tariffs? Anyone want to take that?
Well, I can say that for our members, you know, it depends a little bit on the country and the supplier, but for some products, I know that the lead time can be, you know, 90 days from when you make the order, and usually there's planning that goes ahead of that. And so certainly, as has been mentioned here, when a tariff is instituted while the products are on the water, that's extremely challenging. Regarding who pays the tariff, I think, you know, that's an individual business negotiation, but for the most part, it is paid when it hits the shore. And so regardless of who writes the check, so to speak, it has an impact on pricing throughout the supply chain. And so, you know, it may change the timing of when you pay it, but ultimately the tariff's paid by the consumer, and that'll always be the case.
Thank you. Let's go to the next one. This is for our retailers. What percentage of your current retail sales are products impacted by the import tariffs? Maybe just a ballpark figure.
That's going to be a region by region basis. I will use this as an example. We had our annual meeting in San Antonio, Texas last year, and our affiliate from Alabama couldn't wait to show me jalapeno Sauvignon Blanc that everyone was losing their minds over. There's no way we could sell that in the Northeast. We would be selling Sancerre instead. So finding the exact mix is really market by market. But to Dina's point, I would say that the Northeast does skew a little higher from an import perspective.
Great. There's an interesting question here about the sort of origins of the term package store.
Yeah, so I can take that. Yeah, it's I think it's something that we've talked about or wrestled with for a while in terms of how do you describe a place that if you just call it a liquor store, you know, do they just sell liquor? And chances are no, they're probably selling at least wine and maybe in some places beer. You have places like Massachusetts where people commonly refer to packies as, you know, that's the package stores. So it's part of the vernacular and terminology there in the present day, and it's not outdated in a place like that. And then you get other parts of the country, and you know those businesses may be referred to as something else. So you also have a number of trade associations around the country, the Texas Package Stores Association, the Metropolitan Package Stores Association, whose heritage and roots go back nearly to Prohibition. So I think that there's interest in maintaining those roots and the legacy of what that means. But I do certainly take the point that for a layman, it can be sometimes head scratching to understand if we're selling boxes and wrapping paper versus wine and spirits. So noted.
I keep thinking of the analogy of, you know, I'm from the Midwest, but we said soda, but other parts of the Midwest call it pop. So just sort of some regional terminology that sticks, you know, depending on where you come from. So this question concerns, you know, what's going on in Canada and how that may impact pricing in the United States. Dina, I think maybe you were talking a little bit about that. I wonder if you could expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, to the extent I can. I mean, so, you know, we work with many domestic suppliers, again, who had a robust business in Canada, a lot of them coming out of California, Washington State. Again, that business does not exist at the moment. And the result of that is, you know, a decrease in overall revenue and volume for the wineries, which, you know, ultimately is going to have to be addressed in one of two ways. Either they're going to have to look to move through that product and maybe potentially, you know, look to be more aggressive with their pricing to get their inventories in line. I know many of them are, you know, looking for other opportunities, you know, outside of Canada, internationally. But if you weren't already doing that business, I think it's hard to get into it right now, especially with the export tariffs in place. And so, you know, I think, you know, the other option is obviously them looking at their expense structures and how they're currently supporting the markets, which we don't want to see support go backward, because that impacts marketing activities, you know, whether that's advertising, whether that's, you know, local market support, you know, however that may present itself, that too may be impacted if the loss of business forces them to have to adjust their spending.
Great, thank you. Well, I think we're over time by 6 minutes. I know we pledged to end this at 1:45, but we had such a great conversation and really good questions and engagement from the folks on the line. So just to wrap things up, you know, so grateful to have WSWA and O-Pee-Chee Family Winery and ABL and the Rhode Island Liquor retailers on the line to help share your stories and help us shine a spotlight on some of the practical implications of the tariffs. And of course, you know, as members of the Toast Not Tariffs Coalition, if any of you are interested in learning more, please go to our website to learn more. There's information on letters and submissions. Of course, there's a button at the top where you can click and add your name to the petition. You know, we are united in opposition to tariffs on spirits and wine. Of course, to reiterate, you know, we fully support efforts to grow jobs and manufacturing in the United States, but we are also here to support our fabulous and diverse hospitality industry, which is such a driver for economic growth in the United States. So we want to get back to Toast Not Tariffs, and we hope you all have a fabulous holiday season. We want this to be a prosperous and healthy and successful holiday season for everyone. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
You know,
Thank you.
Thank you.